Hello everyone, welcome to Airbyte's very first Fireside Chat. Thank you. And today we have Scott Sonneborn here with us from Tido. So can you give Scott a round of applause? And before we begin, I'd like to introduce Scott. Before he says anything, I wanted to welcome him. So today, again, we have the pleasure of welcoming Scott Sonneborn, who is the co-founder and CEO of Tido, a leading data integration and analytics company. Scott has been at the helm of Tido since the inception of the company in 2020. He has a strong background in finance. How do I know? He started his career as an analyst at Goldman Sachs. His entrepreneurial spirit and passion for strategy and operations led him to co-found Pop Inc., where he served as the head of strategy and operations. Drawing from his financial expertise and a keen interest in data-driven solutions, Scott ventured into the data space with Tido, right? So Tido is dedicated to empowering businesses with the ability to harness the full potential of their data. By providing cutting-edge data integration and analytic solutions, Tido enables companies to optimize the e-commerce store using comprehensive reports, data visualizations, and insights. Now, as a co-founder of Tido, Scott has played a pivotal role in shaping the company's growth and ensuring that it continues to deliver top-notch services to its clients. So please join me in welcoming again, Scott Sonneborn.
Thank you, and that was a way better intro than I could do myself, so greatly appreciate that.
Okay, great, because I was going to ask you about your background, so if you don't want me to ask anymore, we're good.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Well, before we dive into Tido and even what you're doing with Airbyte, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, separate from Tido? Like, what is it that you like to do for fun? Do you have any hobbies on the side?
Yeah, so super high-level story would be from outside Chicago. Went to school in LA, fell in love with the weather in LA, so living in LA right now with my co-founder Manav. On the weekends, just getting outside as much as possible. Like the hikes and just walking around broadly.
Nice. Awesome. I want to learn a little bit more about how you founded the company. Can you share the story behind the founding of Tido and what inspired you to enter the data space? Because you came from your previous company and then you were also an analyst at Goldman Sachs. So what inspired you to start this company?
For sure. So back to my days at Pop. Pop was building out an e-commerce marketplace. We were working with about 25 brands and trying to build like a premium version of Chewy. So the parallels we would tell people is Chewy's kind of your Walmart or your Target. We want to build a Nordstrom. So with all that in mind, we wanted to have like a hands-on personalized experience, and data was super important for that. My role was leading ops and finance. And one of the questions I got very early on from our CEO, Mark, growth marketer by background, grew 2 companies from 0 to 1 million users in less than a year. Just amazing marketer.
That's impressive.
Super impressive, and why I wanted to work with him. And first question he asked me right as we started scaling is, how much money are we making on an order? And coming from Goldman and being super arrogant and ignorant to the kind of data that we were going to be dealing with, I was like, give me an hour, I'll tell you exactly. That hour turned into a couple of days of just copy and pasting data from PDFs, from different, like the Facebook ad manager, et cetera, just to understand the most basic question, like what are our unit economics, or how much money are we making on this order? And that just made absolutely 0 sense to me, that it was that hard to understand that. So called my college friend Manav. Manav's background is in data science, was at Intuit on the SMB payments team, and then was the first ML hire at a startup called Thanks. And I was like, can we automate this? Like, this can't be that crazy. And again, both being arrogant and ignorant, we're like, yeah, we can do that. So started building that out.
Wow. And I'm curious, right? Founding this company, just the thought of starting that company, you have to really believe in it to really go all in, right? You were at your previous company. What really pushed you to take that risk, to start something all over again?
I just kept talking to people in e-commerce, and I was like, what are you doing today? Like, do you know how much money you're making on an order? The kind of funny part would be, without fail, people would say yes. And I'd be like, great, like, how much? And they would say 50%.
Yeah.
Be like, cool. Like, does that include your shipping costs? No. Does that include like your ad costs? No. Does that include this? Does that include that? And it's so on and so forth. And it was just so crazy to me that somebody would build a business not knowing what their unit economics were. And now that we get deeper and deeper into the space, it's pretty clear like who's successful and who's not. And I guess there's two camps of those people. One, they have like product market fit from a brand perspective. Mm-hmm. They're just acquiring customers. They have high margins by nature of selling at a high price. And they don't need to look at the data, like it's just working. And then the other is the super data-driven brands.
And just from hearing what you were talking about right now, is that how you determine the direction of your company? Or before even starting a company, is that by speaking with a ton of different users, hearing the pain points they're having?
Yeah, so started by building out exactly what I built out at that pet company. Basically just asking people to export their data and then did all that analysis in Google Sheets or Excel, whatever they wanted. And it was crazy. People just wanted answers to very basic questions and couldn't get those answers.
Next topic I want to focus on is on differentiation and industry trends. So how does Tido differentiate itself from other data integration and analytics companies?
Totally. So broadly, compared to all your other horizontal or generalized tools, we're vertical. So obvious statement, but by building something for a specific user, we get to do a lot of things that they just can't do. Whether that's a bespoke visualization or just being opinionated of the data that we're storing, how we're calculating it, so on and so forth. So an example of that would be, because we're only building for e-commerce merchants, we can build out these visualizations that are based on customer segmentation and provide all the benefits of building software with a data company of we can create this completely bespoke UI that allows you to get answers to your data without having to write SQL.
Talking about the data right now, the data space, and I think we're all curious about this, is how do you see the data space evolving over the next few years, seeing that literally we all work in this space? From your point of view, what do you see?
I think the biggest change is people are starting to wake up and realize that we have all this data, but that doesn't necessarily mean we know how to make sense of it. And there are so many great data infrastructure tools now that allow companies like ours to have confidence in the data and therefore insights that we give a customer. So I expect a lot more people to start focusing on things like monitoring and alerting and having faith that the data that they're looking at is actually solid and backable.
Definitely. And talking about that then, are there any, and I am curious, are there any recent advancements in data that you've seen that you find particularly interesting or promising?
Have you heard of a blockchain? No, I'm kidding.
No. Okay, let's end this.
I think the new buzzword answer would be AI.
Oh,
I don't know if that's where you're looking for.
I've never heard of that. No idea what that is.
Yeah, personally, I think the more boring, the better. And a lot of the value is going to come from those really boring tools, quote unquote, where they help you understand if you actually synced all the data that you thought you were syncing, or that the data in your database matches what the API says. As far as how we're thinking about AI or where we think there's advantages, ironically, I think there is a huge opportunity to use GPT and things like that to actually clean your data and structure your data. And it's quite ironic to me that today a lot of the people are saying GPT is getting 80% of the way there, 90% of the way there. I imagine a large part of that is the data is structured in a really poor way where it can't even make sense of it. So I think there's a huge opportunity to leverage. Yeah.
Do you use GPT on a daily basis?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really? Yeah. I know if you're willing to share, how do you use it?
I'm not technical, so every single time I see something on Slack or somebody asks me a technical question or I have no idea what's going on, it's put it into GPT. Without fail, it'll tell me something, I'll be like, make it dumber, please.
Simplify it.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's definitely helpful. I use it every day too. Now the co-founders know. Now, let's change the topic. Talking about data stack and integration. So can you describe your use case with Airbyte at Tido? What data sources do your customers typically use, if you do know?
Sure. So I guess first, what Tido does, we're a self-serve analytics platform for Shopify merchants. So Shopify merchants going to go in, they'll install the Tido app, they connect their Facebook, Google Analytics, and we give them like standard out-of-the-box templates essentially, or visualizations, so they can see how their company is performing. So with that in mind, there's no Tido without Airbyte. It's how we're syncing all that data and building all that analysis on top of it. The connectors that we're using without fail is Shopify. Depending on the brand, it's usually Facebook and Google. And then a lot of those merchants are using Google Analytics as well.
Thank you for. I like that. There's no Tido without Airbyte.
Definitely.
We'll put that on TikTok.
Yeah.
We'll put that on TikTok. What did the initial data stack look like for Tido? Would you know?
Yeah, a little bit.
And where it's at now?
Yeah. So initially it was that Google Sheet. There was no concept of a data stack. Today, using Airbyte, event-driven, everything's going to S3, and then we're doing that normalization.
I like how you keep mentioning Airbyte. That's amazing. You know what? Since you keep, let's keep talking about Airbyte.
Of course.
No, but I'm curious then, right? You spoke a little bit about this, what role Airbyte has played in Tido's data integration strategy. I'm curious how it has really impacted your business.
Yeah, again, no Tido without Airbyte. I would say the biggest benefit by far, though, is for every connector, we're not starting from zero. We're starting from 90, sometimes even 100 of there's not much we need to add to get up and running.
Yeah.
So that plus we don't really have to worry as much about the maintenance aspect of it. We don't want to manage every single connector. Like the value.
Does that save you a lot of time?
A ton of time. And more importantly, or from my perspective, it means our engineers get to work on building features. So we get to outsource all of the actual data movement, and we get to focus on delivering the value to the customers, just like you're delivering value to us.
I like that. Oh, we got questions? Thank you.
How was the support experience with Airbyte?
So the question is, how is the support experience with Airbyte?
Now it's great. See a lot of familiar faces from being on calls, but I mean, ball is in our court to move over to the cloud, and that I think you all have taken all of our feedback very seriously of what we need to get there, and that is greatly, greatly appreciated.
So you started with Airbyte open source and then moved to cloud?
Correct. Or we're in the process of trying to.
So the question was if you started with Airbyte open source and now moving to
Correct.
cloud. Any other questions before I continue? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you said you were on OSS and are now trying to move to cloud. What is like the main reasons for?
So just for those who couldn't hear, so you said you're originally on OSS and now you're moving to cloud. So what are some of the reasons for that?
We don't want to manage the infrastructure. So we have thousands of merchants and thousands of connectors. Inevitably, something will go wrong with our deployment, and we'd have to restart the instance, and that's like a couple hours or a day of an engineer's time that they couldn't be building they could be building a different integration, they could be building a feature, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want to manage all that infrastructure. They care about seeing their data, they care about it being accurate, and they want us to build all those metrics and visualizations on top. What I did not say is like managing that ETL. So we would love to get that off of our plate as soon as possible.
Wow. So support over pricing, pretty much. That's everything.
100%.
Yeah. Any other questions? Jen?
Yeah, what is Tido working on right now for the future when you're thinking about your product and what you provide to your customers?
So what is Tido working on in the future in regards to the product and services?
So it's really that data integrity. A huge benefit for Airbyte from us is being able to build our own monitoring on top to understand what is going on, and at a stream level understand where, like when we last synced, when there was a bookmark. Everything related to that has been super, super powerful. So what we're building is even more on top of that. So one of the new things we started doing is going directly to the sources APIs and storing like primitives, if you will. So like orders from Shopify or revenue from Shopify, and storing that in our database so we can be like, hey, the values from Airbyte match one-to-one with what Shopify's API has. Nice. So we can have complete confidence in the numbers that we're showing a merchant.
Amazing. Yes, John, you may speak.
If you had a magic wand, what would you change on Airbyte?
That was actually my next question, so perfect. Yeah, so if you have a magic wand, right, if there's anything that you would, what would you change about Airbyte?
So one, I asked our engineers like what I should be asking for, so I will pump their book. But the number one thing was kind of programmatic access to these workspaces. So ability to add all of our engineers rather than use a single user in that shared email. The other was pinned connectors. So in the past, there's been breaking changes introduced, and that has kind of spooked our engineering team. And with that in mind, we don't want to automatically upgrade our connectors. We want to kind of use the ones that we're certifying, quote unquote, and go from there. And then from my perspective, one of the things that they didn't highlight, but I know we spent a lot of time on, is that normalization. And if we could get cleaner tables that don't automatically unroll into hundreds and hundreds of tables, it would take a load. Like, I don't even know if we would need the architecture that we have today of purely using Airbyte to extract and put in S3 so we can do all the normalization ourselves.
Now, seeing that you've started, this is your second company now, right? What advice would you give to other people entering the data space and how they can best leverage tools like Airbyte for success?
Yeah, I mean, unless you're building a data infrastructure to a company, I think you have to really think about like where the customer finds value and how you're generating value for that customer. And I'm gonna bet 99 out of 100 times nobody cares what you're using underneath the hood. So the advice I would give is to spend your time building the things that actually deliver value for the customer and outsource the rest. And that's finding the best partners like Airbyte.
I want to ask you a question that's not on here. Being a CEO as well. Not as well, I'm not a CEO. I'm not a CEO. So, no, I'm sorry, Michelle. What is the hardest, what do people not see, the life of being a CEO, a co-founder? What is it like? What is that life like behind the scenes?
It's a lot of bullshit. There's a lot of admin work. I think it's very glorified.
Wow, that was a very short answer. Okay, let me ask something on top of that. What do you look forward to, right, on a day-to-day basis? What are the parts that you like about being the CEO, co-founder?
Co-founder broadly, I think the best part by far is you get to pick the people you work with. I don't know many other roles or jobs, frankly, where it's like you literally get to pick each and every person that you work with.
Yeah. And so having employees work under you, and this is not just for my personal gain, I'm just really curious, what do you measure as a successful employee at your startup, right? How do you measure if someone's being successful or not? And what can someone do, well, I guess this answers the same question, what can someone do to be as successful as they can at a startup? Let's say you start a new startup a couple years from now.
Yeah, like make shit happen. Like, looking at the best people on our team, they just go out of their way, move mountains. They're not waiting for anybody to tell them what to do. They just go do it. And the amount of, and it's just like, the best part is you say something like our director of marketing, I remember we were like, we need to update our website. And as a point of context, the original name for Tido was Polyops. And if any of you want to Google Polyops, Google will very quickly tell you, are you looking for a colon cancer, a polyp? So my co-founder and I are like, we're not brand marketers whatsoever. And it was just like, hey, we need a new website. Like, this is the broadest mandate ever. And she just does an absolutely amazing job of running with that and I think producing a really amazing website. So it's self-starters that just know how to get shit done and don't need much guidance.
Thank you for sharing that. Any questions? Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, David.
My head is still spinning on the data integrity stuff. Can you speak more about how you actually conduct those checks at Tido?
Sure. So with data integrity, I think there's two, from our perspective of like analytics of people running their business, there's really two perspectives. So one is just like, are we collecting all of this, or three, are we getting all of this data? Like, are the calculations we're running on top of the data, like that data underneath, is it the right data? The second is, are we running the right calculation? Like, when I write the business logic or somebody on our team writes the business logic of this is how we want it to work in Google Sheet, somebody has to translate that to SQL or Python. And then there's another level of something like revenue. There's a million different ways to calculate that. Like, do you want to include shipping revenue? Is that actually revenue? Or do you only want to look at product revenue? And that business logic alignment is really, really hard, particularly when these platforms all have different incentives that are not aligned with the business incentive. So a ludicrous thing that Shopify does is in your total sales, they include taxes. You don't get to keep that money. Like, that money goes to the government. But Shopify will tell you that your total sales are blank. And what does that mean? Tido's numbers almost always going to be 10% less. So we will get people that come to us and say, like, your data's wrong, your data's off. And we have to educate them of, we have a different calculation. So I guess a really long-winded way of answering a question, but like, first you need business level, like, logic alignment. Then you need whatever like equation you have to actually be calculating what you say you're going to calculate. And then the data has to be sound underneath. So we're building things at all levels. I think to ensure that the data is actually accurate, we're just checking those primitives against the API. The business logic, we've basically just created a crazy glossary where we will take the chat GPT, like explain it like a Maffei approach of, here is the Excel formula, if you will, here is the layman's definition, and here's a story of like how you can think about this, and really just trying to bring people alignment. And then it's a lot of debugging with people building dashboards and checking that against what our engineers are building. Frankly, we get asked a lot about that. Like, people want SLAs, if you will, of like data integrity SLAs. I think the really tricky part for both of us is, if Facebook changes something, what are we going to do about it, right? Like, it's going to take time to update it. So it's really hard to commit to these SLAs. But yes, if there was a way that we could have even more confidence in the data that Airbyte is delivering, we would absolutely be interested.
Is there anything that you're worried about in the field that we're in right now in data? Anything that you think about every so often?
From an e-commerce perspective, I think like everybody's worried about the same thing, which is, what is Apple going to do next? And everything that's happened with an app, like tracking transparency perspective, I think we still haven't seen the ripples unfold there. But where I'm worried is Facebook and Google have built these amazing walled gardens, but it was all built on top of these brands' data, sharing back like who are the good customers and who are not the good customers. And now Apple is making it so easy for people to opt out of that I don't know about the efficacy of these marketing platforms moving forward. And that is going to potentially drive very poor outcomes for some of these brands.
And something I am curious about, do you have people in your company using ChatGPT? Do you suggest them to use it on a daily basis?
Yeah, anybody at Tido that wants a ChatGPT Pro license, we're all for it. And I think it's just an amazing tool, and we want everybody to use it.
Amazing. So I don't feel so bad using it. Oh, yes,
Do you think
Michelle.
Shopify is going to be the next walled garden because they know every single customer?
They should be. I don't know if they'll do it, but we see like early signs of that with Shopify audiences. So for those of you who may not know, like Shopify audiences are, Shopify will take all of their merchants, they aggregate that customer data, and they'll essentially do lookalikes or say who are the customers most like your customers, and allow you to use that audience to target people on Facebook or I think TikTok too. But it basically allows you to give Facebook a bigger group or list of people rather than just your own, which is supposed to increase Facebook's efficacy. So I think there could be a chance that Shopify builds that walled garden.
Anyone else?
Thousands of Airbyte connectors. How many Tido employees are Airbyte users, and what are their roles?
So the question is, how many Tido employees are Airbyte users, and what are their roles?
Yeah, so so my co-founder definitely, and then we have 2 back-end engineers, and both of them are using Airbyte daily. We have a data scientist who is kind of building out our initial models for all of that, and she would be an Airbyte user. And then one of the engineering managers is built like was very, very helpful with thinking through all these like data integrity issues and how do we want to build our alerting and monitoring, especially for Airbyte on that, just because we are reliant on all the data we get from there. So a long way of saying like 4 or 5 folks.
How many employees do you have at Tido?
20.
20. One of the things I love working here at Airbyte is the culture is pretty amazing, right? Culture's, you hear that, Michelle? John? Okay. But the culture here is pretty amazing, and I talk about that all the time, everywhere I go. I mean it. I really mean it. Okay. I really do mean it. And so I am curious, how important is culture at Tido? Is that something you emphasize with the team, starting at 20 employees and eventually going to grow?
Yeah, potentially like a contrarian take, but I think that like culture is really just the group of people that you put together. So it's not like a static thing. It's constantly changing. It's definitely something that we're intentional about of when we're hiring somebody. Like they are, especially when you're as small as we are, they're going to influence the culture. So we want to make sure that it's continuing evolving and it's evolving how the business is evolving as well.
Any other questions? Yes.
Outside the data integrity pain point, in other parts of so Airbyte helps you with extracting data, loading it into where you need it to be, like S3 today. But elsewhere along your data infrastructure or your data stack, or are there generally other pains or problems where you guys either don't have an answer for it, maybe there's a gap, maybe someone hasn't invented what you need yet? Is there any that pop into your head when you think about them at a high level?
You probably know more about our stack than I do at this point. So I would love your answer to that question. But I think broadly, going back to like, I think the developments from a data perspective are all going to be the boring things. Like, it's great that we have all this data in one place, like in our data warehouse. Now the question is, what the fuck do we do with it, right? So the reverse ETL, or what people are branding as that, I think is a really interesting opportunity for us of going back to the Shopify audiences of how do we actually expose all this aggregate data set or this merchant's data and allow them to use that outside of the Tido platform. So moving that to Facebook, moving that to Klaviyo, which is the email tool that most e-commerce merchants use, could be a huge unlock.
Nothing venture, nothing gains, so I'm trying. So you are in a powered by Airbyte use case, that's how we call it internally. And what would be the best pricing model according to you as a client?
So as a client, what would be the best pricing model for you? What would you like to see?
I can tell you what we would not like to see, which is MAR and credits. From my perspective, the predictability is really important. So having like a fixed cost or being able to actually predict like what our cost would be huge.
Scott, I want to thank you for coming to our very first Fireside Chat. I really hope you like our homemade fireplace right here.
It's amazing.
Yes, and hopefully we get to talk again. Thank you. Can you get one more round of applause for Scott? Thank you.
Thank you so much.